Well, Matt.
John. At this point, John, I would say we have quorum, and whenever you're ready.
All right, you've taken roll call.
I have.
Okay, so I'll call to order the November 2nd, 2020 meeting of the Parks, Recreation, Forestry Commission. As the first item of business, I would ask for a motion to accept the minutes as submitted from last meeting of October 19th.
I will move to approve the meetings, or the minutes.
Anybody second that?
I'll second.
All right, thank you, Sue. All right, any corrections, changes, additions, deletions? All right, then all in favor of accepting the minutes as submitted, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you. Now on to new business. We have to look at the wording of contract to Boley Tree and Landscape Services for tree pruning services. Matt, I'll turn this to you to talk about.
This is pretty simple, straightforward. Mark divided the work into two areas, more common pruning, and then more tree structure type pruning, where he was concerned and wanting to make sure that we had someone that was skilled in that area, and divided it out. Ended up low bid, went to Boley for both of the projects, and total award amount is under the budgeted. So looking for recommendation to council, finance council, for approving these contracts.
All right, I guess I would entertain a motion.
Well, I will move that we approve of these contracts to Boley Tree and Landscape.
All right, is there a second to that?
I'll second it.
All right, thank you, Aaron. All right, discussion, questions, concerns, issues.
So do we need two motions there, or just one motion?
The way it's agendized, it's one motion.
It's one motion, yeah.
Do we need to include the dollar amounts as stated in your recommendation?
I don't know how critical that is at the committee level. Finance typically makes sure to include that when they make their approval.
But that's what we're voting on, is per the.
Yep.
Well, we're voting on who to award the contract to, as opposed to, I think, the details of the contract. Is that correct? Or the
I think you're both.
both, okay.
We can argue semantics over which committee's got more oversight over certain things, and it's completely fine to include the amount in the award.
Just so it's understood that we're going per your recommendation.
Yes.
Marks, I guess I should say.
All right, any further discussion, questions, concerns? All right, hearing none, I'll call a question. All those in favor signify aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstained? All right, motion passes. We now move on to the third agenda item. Actually, the second agenda item, I believe. The third is a comprehensive outdoor recreation plan. The draft review, I know, Matt, you sent us several chapters that weren't there before.
Yeah, and
Did a chance to look through all 80 pages of them or something?
Becky's got an outline of things to discuss with you. What I want to, kind of hammer home here at the beginning is obviously this has been a unique process being done virtually and not in person. And what I really appreciate is the number of you that went out and reviewed park sites and gave feedback and rankings and thoughts on what was important in the next 5 years. And I know that was helpful to Becky as well. The big part of today is determining if wherever we are at, in this plan, are we ready to have the whole thing come back and be voted on for approval or denial in 2 weeks? And so I wanted to make sure that everyone kind of had that understanding that this is a work session or whatever you want to call it, to have concerns brought up, answer any questions that you have, and make sure that we're heading in the right direction for potential approval on the 16th of November. And with that, I will turn this over to Becky, who has lots for you tonight.
Go for it, Becky.
Not as much as last time. Thanks for the setup, Matt. So you guys do have the entire draft of the plan right now, but tonight what I really want to focus on is just one chapter, the implementation chapter. I wanted to give you guys, if we decide that we're ready to go potentially for approval on the 16th, I wanted to give you guys enough time to look through the entire document. So that's why you have all 100+ pages right now. So right now the plan is to go over just chapter 6 tonight, a few highlights that Matt and I have talked about. And then on the 16th, I'll tentatively go through just highlights of the entire plan. You guys have seen most of the big stuff. So the analysis, demand analysis, the recommendations, and then the implementation. Those are kind of the heavy chapters. But we'll go through the whole thing in a couple weeks. So with that being said, I have a few things highlighted in chapter 6 I want to jump right into. Matt, can I share my screen? Yes.
You should be able to. I just need to probably stop what I'm sharing.
All right, I can do that. Okay. Screen 1.
There we go.
All right, you guys can see it?
Yes.
Okay. So the first kind of topic we wanted to talk about is restrooms, and whether we want to be prioritizing adding new restrooms or making existing restrooms year-round. So for example, right now for Middleton Hills Park North, we have installed new restrooms. And thank you again for all the feedback. Like Matt said, that was really helpful. So based on the scoring sheets you guys gave me, the installing new restrooms came out as a high priority for Middleton Hills Park. And if we look at Orchid Heights, we had convert restrooms to year-round, and that came out as a low priority from the group. So we just wanted to check back in with you guys and see kind of where you stand and what the general consensus is. Do we want to generally be focusing on converting existing restrooms to year-round, or would we prioritize creating new restrooms over that? And I guess I'm looking for feedback on what you guys think.
I
Well, I
think
guess I
I
can
just
jump in.
add
I
that
think-
go ahead, John.
I was going to say, I think you got some feedback when you got kind of low priority on the winter things. Personally, I also think that having the primary time the parks are being used heaviest to have restrooms there becomes more and more important. And so that's certainly for me, focusing on new facilities as opposed to winterizing old ones. Doesn't mean it wouldn't be nice to have the old ones winterized, but I think certainly from my perspective, I agree with that priority. Sorry, Matt, go ahead.
No, I was just going to jump in and say that as we've learned, these restroom projects tend to be the most expensive that we look at, and I think being realistic about what we can accomplish in the next 5 years in that regard, knowing that we've done 2 in the past 3 years, and knowing some of the other needs out there, that may be a big thing to kind of look at where our priorities lie, was all I was going to say.
Well, if I'm correct, having it as a priority doesn't mean it's going to happen. Because if you look at the priorities, the bottom line is a lot more than we're ever going to get. So it's a point of emphasis, I guess.
Sue?
Are we talking about a new shelter and building winterized wet restrooms, or are we talking about winterizing the shelter that we have?
So this was a question for Matt. I talked to our architect today, and he suggested that we do some kind of architectural review of the building just to make sure that it can be converted. Because he was looking at it and he's like, I think this might be prefab. I'm not entirely sure if it's convertible. So you'd have to look into it a little more. So I think that's still up in the air unless you guys have looked at it already, Matt.
We haven't, and again, Orchid Heights, I believe that shelter was put in somewhere in the 2000 to 2005 range. So it, you know, it's not as stately as Parisi or Fireman's that are kind of on that, you know, more recent list, or on the next few years list already. So.
Any
May I
other
say
thought?
something again? Okay, Orchid Heights is, and the Conservancy is an area that's used a lot in the winter.
Yep.
For winter sports and just walking and cross-country skiing. And I think of all the parks or the restrooms that would be important in the winter, I think that one, it would be important to have a restroom in the winter. But I'm saying that without without knowing the cost. I mean, if it's going to be very expensive, then of course I'm really not for it.
So if it can be converted, I just got the cost from our architect today. He thought it would cost about between 40 and 60,000 to convert it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and here's, you know, from a staff perspective, we probably get more calls and complaints about the Orchid Height restrooms being closed in the winter months than anywhere. I mean, Lakeview is probably on that list too. That's no longer an issue. So I think, as Sue states, Orchid Heights does come to the height of that list. The concern I have right now, and this is a 2020 problem, is we've always placed a porta-john in Orchid Heights during the winter months. And I've got to decide, are we doing that now? We've gotten some calls, and the concern that I have is how we keep it clean. And knowing that the company isn't going to come clean it, do we have staffing resources to be able to do that on a consistent enough basis to make that a priority? And if put it there, it's going to have to be. So those are things that I have to decide here in the coming days.
Yeah, my internet's been spotty. So if I missed this comment while I had to reconnect, I apologize. But for Middleton Hills, I had put a priority on the restrooms just simply because I myself had not planned 2 different events there because of the fact that there weren't restrooms. So thinking more, long-term revenue options for rentability for the city, but at 40 to 60, that's kind of a steep recovery point for renting a facility.
You're also sideways too on my screen, is that? Here?
Is that mine? Sorry, I'm on my phone now.
There you go.
I have no
Okay.
idea what's going on with my internet.
You sounded funny sideways.
Matt, I think for now you rely on the porta-john.
Yeah.
A lot less expensive than trying to, and there's so many things on these lists, of some of which are very expensive.
Yeah.
All right, so general consensus, keep it a high priority, keep converting to year-round at Orchid Heights low.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's not for lack of it being used. It just seems with all the other things.
Yeah, there's a lot to do and not a ton of money to do it with, so. Okay. All right, the other thing we wanted to look at, let's see, we're going to page 125. So we had a recommendation to improve the drainage to remedy flooding on the soccer field and path at Stricker Park. And talking to Matt about that, it sounds like youth soccer is moving away from using these fields. So they are going to be more open for city and other public use. However, it sounds like fixing the stormwater issue here is a lower priority on the city engineer's list. So conditions are not likely to improve soon.
Well, Matt can correct me, but it's my understanding that there was a sort of a turf thing between that area that by water management, that was considered an overflow floodplain. It was never meant to be soccer fields, and that there was some disagreement as to who owns it and who should be taking care of it. And I wonder if that's still the case. I mean, I
So,
put it as a low priority because you told us before that's not really our soccer fields and was never designed to be soccer fields.
so that is designed as a stormwater feature
Yeah.
or stormwater to overflow. And because it was a nice flat area and there was pressure to have more soccer fields, it kind of inherently became a soccer field. And as we had, I think 2017, 2018, 2019 were all really wet, and that area was obviously after the flooding in 18, it was significantly impacted. And I just questioned that without a significant project there, you're always going to have issues and concerns in trying to make that a usable soccer field. And is it more appropriate to be open green space instead of trying to force a soccer field onto something that isn't there? And then it gets into the if you're going to do a stormwater improvement project, from a stormwater standpoint, how the engineers look at it is that functioned exactly the way it's designed and intended. So that's not a priority for them that they're going to spend money from a stormwater standpoint. And if we're going to do a project there, it's likely going to have to be funded from parks. And I don't know that we get our best, investment there in a neighborhood park where we've got issues in some of our athletic complexes that I'd rather see our at least our short-term focus in improving those athletic complexes and maximizing play opportunity there than a neighborhood park. I understand the neighborhood would love to see that as lush as green grass space, but I think that the cost of doing so is maybe a prohibitive factor.
I have a colleague who moved in a house right on Voss Parkway, I guess, about 20 years ago. When he moved in, he thought it was in fact a lake back there, and that was part of what attracted him to buy the house.
Not good.
I see lots of, there's lots of geese and wildlife and stuff that use that area when it's sort of wet. So it sort of becomes almost a Stricker's extension of the wildlife thing. And I guess personally, obviously I've rated this as a low priority. Others rated it as high. I think it gets too complicated for what it is. And with you, Matt, I'd rather put our emphasis on other facilities that are more, value more from upgrading.
I think we have to be careful too when we look at neighborhood parks of what infrastructure is there to support the activity. And when you put a soccer field there, you're bringing people from outside the neighborhood. And anywhere we do that, we run into issues, whether it's parking, it's usually parking. But, Middleton Hills, we have the same problem at Middleton Hills South with soccer there. It creates some traffic and safety concerns when a ball goes out in the street. And, there's a reason why athletic complexes are popular. You maximize the use of that space, you put the amenities there. And I'm all for having green space in the park, but designating it as a soccer field. And the minute we would spend money to improve that, to make it a soccer field, that's really all that's going to probably happen there.
Yeah. All right. Other comments from others?
Is everyone good with
I
low
guess
priority and focusing?
my only comment would be to take it from a low to a non-existent priority, but just
Take it
take
off.
There you go, David.
We can take
Yes.
it off if everyone's good with that.
The only benefit in leaving something there is not the athletic field as much as the path. That if there was a way to pipe underneath the path, right now they have it flow over the path. And it'd be nice. We've done this in some other sites, and because this is a designated stormwater area, it's a little, I'm not saying it's more complicated. I just need to involve Gary at a greater detail and find out what is possible there in terms of a pipe and being able to get the water to flow under the path instead of over the path, because we have lots of problems and negative feedback. And if we're able to do what we've done in some other sites this summer, it's a relatively low cost thing that we can do in-house.
Well, you did 2 of them at Tiedemann's, and except for the dirt piles, they look great, you know.
Yeah. The
Sorry.
dirt will leave. The dirt will leave.
So we'll
Uh,
keep
so
the
there is-
path. Is that,
I guess if listening to Mark and nobody else is, I would think that we should put it as low priority and leave it in there. Because I know for about a year, you couldn't walk on the path because of the flooding, and it happens all the time.
Okay.
Anybody else? We're all comfortable with that as a committee?
I agree.
all right, we'll leave it in. All right, the next thing was the Metropolitan Community Park Dog Park on page 127. So we have a medium priority on implementing the 2014 master plan, which a lot of that is supporting youth sports. And the thing Matt and I talked about was, do we want to add something here that the city needs a partner in order to further develop facilities for youth sports? It comes at a hefty price tag, I guess. And we've talked about partnerships elsewhere related to soccer complexes. So is that something we want to do here? And understanding that the city has an agreement with, I forget the name of it.
It's the Rush Soccer Organization is who the agreement's with now.
Fields, aren't they?
I'm sorry, John, what was that?
They're maintaining 2 or 3 fields or 4 fields. On that,
Yeah, they were heavily involved in the initial development, and it's another one of these situations where, as the agreement currently reads, if fields were further developed out there, they'd be only access to Middleton Rush or Rush Soccer. And my thought, my theory, whatever you want to call it here, is that if we're going to invest in outdoor athletic facilities, they need to be, available for multiple groups and not just tied to one, and available to our programming and have the ability for other groups to have access, because we've all seen and ran into that issue. The problem becomes, and why we're in this situation, is somebody comes to us and wants to develop something and has money to do so, and therefore wants sole use or proprietary use, or some larger stake, which I completely understand as well. But it puts us in these situations where it's, this group has their facility here and this group has their facility here, and nobody can play nicely with each other because they've all invested in the development of the facility. And I think we just have to be careful of how we proceed on some of these moves.
Right, and just carefully crafting the language for the agreement as far as use, to make sure these groups don't get blanket use.
yeah, I personally don't think as the city, we should be putting in a bunch of parks that then we sort of rent them away from the city people to be able to use as parks. And sometimes I feel like we push that boundary, and I understand it's also use and money and help, and we're underfunded, but I really do. We kind of went through this with Lakeside too, and we're looking at soccer fields there, or whatever kind of fields, that there needs to be some area that's just simply open space and people to use, and things like that. So,
Well, and plus this park is so out there, right? It's not accessible except for by car. It's almost as close to Wanakee as it is to Middleton. I feel like I'm just looking at the price tag on there. I'm like, why would we pay that much money for something that is not going to be accessible to most people in the community?
that's right.
The only thing I will say to that is it's out there now. 20 years from now, we have no idea. And I always marveled at Appleton development of Memorial Park, when it was in the middle of nowhere and now is almost, it's not middle of Appleton, but it's surrounded on all sides by growth. So you've got to have forward thought there too in terms of land development and what could happen. But yeah, right now it's out there in the middle of nowhere.
But I guess as Becky was saying, it sort of just put it on a kind of a caution level that I don't think it should be a high priority, but if you do it, it's okay to look and working with these groups, but we should have a fairly consistent sense about how far we're willing to go to partner with private groups and just be careful and cautious. And yeah, it's a lot of money.
Yeah, that's something. So I talked to the city of Madison, the person in their parks department who does all their agreements. And that's something they wrestled with too, is partnerships with these private sports organizations. And then their sports groups felt entitled to use of the field. So that's something they had to kind of work with them on. And they offered up a few strategies that I'll go over in a few minutes. But I think that can work. It seems to have worked elsewhere. So just making sure the agreements don't give exclusive rights to groups, making them a little bit more open.
But are you also asking that whether this should be kept a medium or low or high priority? Or are you just saying that?
I wasn't, but it could. I mean, now that we're looking at, now that we've seen all the priorities kind of in one list, if you want to rethink that, let me know.
Throw it out to the committee. What's your feelings? I mean, I've personally just expressed some caution. It's like something I don't think you want to pull it off a list. I'm not sure that in the short term, if we're looking at 5 years, that it becomes that high a priority. But
I'm kind of in agreement, making it more of a lower priority. Just, revisit again, and when we do the process again in 5 years, and but I don't know. It just seems there's a lot on the plate right now in the next 5 years, and that's something that we could get more bang for our buck, I guess, out of instead of up there.
Yeah, Sue, David, Aaron, any thoughts on this?
Well, if we do start getting into agreements with some of these other entities, such as Rush, I think we need to have some sort of contract or memorandum of understanding or something, so we're crystal clear as to what everybody's obligations are, because it can get to be really bad after the fact if you don't have that in place.
Well, I've always thought that the city parks and the city property belong to the public more so than the private organizations. And so I'm more in favor of some kind of an agreement that does not give them exclusive use of a piece of property that we have.
So here's the challenge, and I think I've laid this out before, and if I haven't, I'm going to now. These organizations, I'm going to provide their thought and why they think the way they do. Middleton needed youth baseball and softball. There was a void. Nobody was offering the programming. They've offered it. Middleton baseball, softball's offered it for a gazillion years. It's a community program that anyone in the community has access to. Granted, there's pay for play, but even the stuff we run and operate, you have to pay to participate in the program. There's varying fees, of course, involved. But the other piece is they develop the property, and football to a lesser extent, a lot of it the same is true, but they view themselves as the recreational provider of those programs in the community, because 20 years ago, there wasn't anybody doing it, and probably longer ago than that. And so, the alternative here is for the city to say, we're going to invest in an athletic field facility and build it, and then we're going to determine who can use it. But the past method of operating has been the youth groups come, have some money, need some assistance from the city, and the city goes, well, it's a better deal than the city having to pay the full freight, and that's why we're in the situation we're in. So the only way I see us cleanly evolving is if we're going to build our own facility. We don't have the land to do it. We don't have any space to do it. So we're kind of stuck with where we're at and trying to find a way that now, those programs exist. We have population growth. We've got demand for services that we can't support. And it's going to come to I see an ugly, well, maybe not ugly is not the right word, but a contentious decision at some point in the future. And I'm playing referee in the middle because I'm working with Middleton baseball, softball. I see their side of it. I see our need to add recreational youth baseball, softball programming, and there isn't a great answer right now.
Well, this particular item is also, go ahead, Dave.
I think we need to continue to work with these groups because you're right. We can't afford to do it on our own, and there is a void that needs to be filled. And I just think that the problem, what I've seen in the past and some other places, is well, let me give you an example of a parking lot next to the Penny Klein Park that's in the town of Middleton that was requested by the city of Middleton be put in, and the city would pay for it, and it all sounded great until it needed some help. And then the question was who was going to pay for it. And it got to be a little ugly at times, and probably will get ugly in the future. I don't know how much Matt's had to deal with that, but I just think we need to have details and agreements put in place before we agree to things.
Well, I guess one of the other questions, this is working off a 2014 master plan, which is already 6 years old. And whether before we prioritize a 6-year-old plan, we should be looking at the plan again to see if it still continues to be exactly what we want, which is why I think it's important to have something here, and we should in the future look at this plan, but making it a priority to implement it right now seems to me, without, again, having a clear sense of how we want to interact with these groups and knowing what that plan was in detail, that probably I would still opt to put it, either leave it as medium or put it as a low priority.
So John, one of the things that Becky and I have talked about is this idea of master plan, and either if a site has a master plan or if it doesn't have a master plan, when we are coming up a year prior to a project in that park site, so say for instance our playground replacement, that we start this idea of either updating or creating a master plan for the park, that we get input from the neighborhood at the same time we're talking about the playground, and trying to have more comprehensive planning for all of our park sites. And again, you're going to have to look at this park by park. It doesn't make sense to do a fully involved master plan for a half-acre mini park, or but at least at our community parks and neighborhood parks, we should all have some kind of plan for their current status and future development. And Parisi is going to be the first one that I try and push us to take this on, because if we are going to look at a shelter there in 2022, which is kind of currently where I've got it laid out in the master plan, we've got some ingress egress issues into that park. We've got a basketball court in the middle of a parking lot. There's some things that we could really do a nice job with there. And it makes a lot of sense to try and take a look at that. But I think it's something that we need to start looking at in all of our, at least, at a minimum level, our community and neighborhood parks.
Yeah, the larger parks, there's a lot of acreage here in this park, and there's a lot of diversity of what goes on here. And so I think it's, well, so what, you can sit and play in the middle, Matt, which is at some level you have to do. I would like to hear your opinion on this, where this should stay as where it is.
Rush isn't knocking down my door saying we need more fields. The reality is it's city controlled land that's our most likely spot to develop additional athletic fields if we were going to have to do so tomorrow. So I don't know if I can play in the middle anymore there, John, but those are that's the reality of the situation. We don't have anybody saying that, and the agreement right now, if I'm correct, gives, I mean, really Rush is the only one that can really be involved in the development there. So there's that issue. And then there's the issue that if, I feel strongly that if we're going to put money into athletic fields, that we've got to be the controlling party and be more of the referee in terms of who's using it moving forward. And I realize that's wishful thinking as well. So,
well, I think you've gotten a good feedback, and the committee seems pretty unanimous in that sense, that we all feel that tightness and control needs to be there, perhaps better than it has been. And it still really just comes down to backing this one item. And I'm at this moment inclined to just leave it as it is. It's so expensive. It's not likely to happen anyway. So it just keeps it there as something that's on the page. You should pay some attention to. I don't know,
All right, we'll keep it
everybody
there.
comfortable with that?
Yeah,
I agree.
and just knowing we'll revisit it when you guys.
At the time, when the time is there, we will.
Yep. Okay. All right. Okay. The next thing I had is kind of related to that. So the agreements. So like I said, I talked to the City of Madison Parks Department, and they've dealt with some similar issues, not being able to use their fields for city programming because they're booked by other organizations. And similar to Middleton, they are also concerned about equity and access to youth sports programming. So not all kids have access to pay for memberships to private organizations. So one lesson I think to be learned from them is they now have all organizations sign up for specific dates and specific times and give organizations a deadline to submit those dates and times. And then they give them another deadline a little bit later to refine those reservations. So no groups are blanket booking fields. And it seems to be working well for them. It might not be popular, but I think how we frame it to sports organizations, if this is something we're comfortable with, is we want to focus on equity and work with the sports organizations to free up the fields when we know they're not being used. I think that has the potential to also work for Middleton, but we wanted to get your thoughts on that approach. And it sounds like this would only really affect Middleton softball and baseball. So
This is, you're talking about that the dotted item in the red box, right?
yes.
Yes. Yeah.
and Becky, just to clarify, we would need to revise our agreements with Middleton baseball, softball, and negotiate this into future agreements.
Right.
And I don't, you always want to have negotiation not be one-sided where one's asking for something. We're asking, and I don't see a really compelling reason for them to just say, okay. So we're gonna have to spend some time on strategizing how we move that forward if that's the goal. Because we have the right to renegotiate the agreement, but at the same time, it's going to be an interesting discussion.
Well, I think you could be a little more verbose in here. For example, some of the words I find problematic is the organizations will provide times that they need fields, as opposed to that they're requesting to use the fields. And I think it'd be more explicit about the city maintains priority over their use of these fields. And with that in mind, then we need to set up deadlines and timetables for people to do these kinds of things so that the statement's a little more clear what the intent is. Here, it just sort of sounds like a scheduling issue rather than a prioritizing issue.
I think the intent, at least from what I got from Madison, is these groups would still be prioritized, but they just wouldn't be blanket booking. They would have very specific dates and times.
Right, but then you could add that in there too. I just think it's a good idea personally, because it fits what we've talked about and what we sort of agreed, that the city needs to maintain some control over city parkland for city people. And yes, these groups are part of that, but they shouldn't be controlling that interest in it. Other thoughts?
Please feel free to say, Matt, stop talking. But it's important to note here that the city has to reserve its own fields from Middleton baseball, softball to use them. So, John, I completely agree and understand what you're talking, but we're so far away from that model we have to book our own fields through a third party.
Well, so what can we do to start to slowly change this process? I mean, are these agreements in perpetuity? Do they go on for the next 12 centuries, or do they come up from periodic renewal
They're,
and
they're
reevaluation?
Yeah.
It's a
So
5-year agreement with automatic renewal unless one party notifies the other in writing to change that.
These are written agreements.
I'm sorry, David, you broke up there.
These are written agreements that we have.
Correct.
And do they specify what our responsibilities are?
For the most part, yes. There's,
And when are they next due for renewal?
I think we're approaching that window.
Okay.
the last
I-
amendment was 2016. So I don't know if that means 2021.
What Becky brings up there is these have been amended. I think we're on amendment 5 or 6. There were amendments to bring the school district into the agreement. There were amendment for the concession facility. There's an amendment for the batting facility. So these have evolved over time, and they're well thought out, but it goes back to this premise of our department not running a great deal of rec programs, and specifically not baseball and softball in any capacity when they were originally drafted.
Yeah, I don't think, putting this paragraph and doing that in there, I don't think it says you have to change what you're doing. It's saying that now we need to consider these things as it comes up in the future. I mean, I could see even adding a sentence at the end of it says, this will be prioritized when agreements are renewed in the future and will become part of the new framework or something. It's not mandating, it's just simply saying we hopefully should take some priority to this. I'd like to hear from the rest of the committee.
Yeah, I guess I would agree with John there. I mean, I don't think it's harmful to have some transitional language. Obviously, these changes aren't going to happen, a jarring shift in the near future. So I think that's the best way to start transitioning and just keep it an open conversation in the next few years. But I would agree with John on the language, just, add a little bit to that and make them aware that, this is what we're working towards.
Matt, coming back just something you said just a few moments ago about the city of Middleton not providing any kind of rec programming for baseball or softball. So the only opportunity for children in the city of Middleton to play softball or baseball is to join the organization. Is that correct? You're muted. There you go.
Things have evolved. If I'm a parent in Middleton today, I probably have an endless list of organizations within the Dane County region that I can go and play baseball or softball with. You tend to start out at home, and really the Middleton baseball softball is the only player. They're the only offering at that introductory ages. We, for the last 3 years, have ran the West Middleton program out at the town of Middleton fields. I'm not going to speculate on the future of that program, but there was a meeting to discuss how that proceeds in future, and there's ongoing discussions about that program. And
Okay.
it doesn't mean that just someone from the town of Middleton can participate. They can cross lines.
I guess I asked the question. I've not actually looked to see how much it costs to have your child participate in softball or baseball with the organization in Middleton, but I know from other experiences that when a city runs something or municipality runs something, it tends to be much more affordable, and therefore you're opening doors to for people of low income to access that. And if you're telling a family who is, you know, doesn't necessarily have the means to pay several $100s a year for sports, that's the only way that you can participate in an organized sport, that's saying a lot about our community, I think. And it would be nice if we could somehow, you know, transition once again to like thinking of, I mean, I know this is just baseball, softball, but the rec programming has expanded quite a bit over the last several years. You know, we've seen the budgets that have come in, and like it seems like it's doing well financially as well. So is this an opportunity? I know it's going to cost money for the city of Middleton to do so, but to offer something else and see how it goes. So people who are coming from low income backgrounds have an opportunity to participate in this stuff.
And also with that, a lot of families don't have just one child that they need to pay that fee for. Some families have, you know, 2 or 3 or maybe 4 children that want to participate in a fee sport. And I'm along with you, Nick, that we have to think about the amount of money that families need to pay to have their children in these sports.
So it's important to note, I think everyone here can appreciate that with my 14-year-old and 11-year-old, we've seen the gamut of youth sport offerings. I think the Middleton fees are in line with most other organizations. What MBSC is charging, I don't think is much different than what I'm paying for my kids to play in a city program in Whitewater where they go to school. They also, MBSC offers a scholarship program to anyone who's on free or reduced school lunch. There's a burden of proof there in proving that and that sort of thing, but they do offer scholarship programs. I think they have an annual fundraiser that supports efforts like that. So I think they're doing those things. It's just there's in every community there's a group of parents that don't want to commit to that level or want something or are going to come to the city for a more recreational approach, and they can, you know, MBSC can say they're recreational and you get in these black and white of this is recreational, this is competitive, and really a good recreational program as MBSC is, they're also providing a more competitive experience because they are a feeder program to, you know, the high school baseball program and the high school softball program. And, you know, that everybody has a different viewpoint on that. And I don't want to cast aspersions or anything like that. The reality was when I was in Whitewater for 10 years, we had people that wanted a rec program. We had people that wanted the world's most competitive youth program you could find. And the reality is we didn't have enough kids to do both. So we had to sit somewhere in the middle. The reality in Middleton is there's plenty of for both and then some. And it's all about, I think what we've seen is we've got a capacity, ability to provide good programming. We have the staff that can pull it off. We just don't have the facilities to make it happen.
No, but I think there's a slightly bigger issue, and I agree with Nick and Sue and all of those, that this part of this general conversation is to what extent do we allow our city parks to be controlled and run by private groups. And it's not saying you shouldn't have our own baseball thing. It doesn't say that this baseball program doesn't work the way it's working for everybody. But I think you're getting a general feedback here that this added paragraph about detailed reservations, et cetera, fits a general pattern that I think this committee would like to see the city get back a little more control of parks when the opportunity arises as a sort of a general overriding principle. And I guess that paragraph, why I was suggesting a couple of rewordings, is to put that in there so that it just sort of gives a sense like in the future, you need to know the city is in charge of the city parks. And yet it doesn't hamper you from doing the kind of agreements you're making, et cetera, but it gives some guidance.
So I have another question. Now we've been talking about baseball and fields.
Mm-hmm.
What about the courts, the tennis courts? What kind of agreements are on the courts?
We have no agreements with any of the tennis providers. They come in, they make a reservation, they follow our policies and procedures and reserve the courts and pay for them and run their programming. Is it a system that is free of error? I can't say that. I don't know. We have a lot of bickering and arguing between, what I would call commercial tennis facilities and individual instructors who reserve our courts and run lessons. And there's a lot of territorial fighting over things, and I don't know that I want to get any further into it than that for this discussion. It's not a perfect system by any means, but everyone's following the procedures in place that are there for anybody who wants to reserve tennis court. And that includes the adult USTA program, where USTA comes in and runs adult league on, I think, 3 or 4 evenings a week. And then we have, I think a lot of people know Lyle Schaefer and his daughter run tennis lessons on our courts. We also have others that do it as well. They're not the only ones by any means.
Right, but in a sense, they're not controlling these courts. They're users, which is a little different than like the baseball situation or something.
Okay.
Right, and we run our own tennis program where we we obviously block out the courts for when we need to run our tennis lessons as well.
Okay.
Right, other discussion on this item? Is there a consensus that at least something like this needs to be in the document?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. Okay.
Okay, good.
But
We'll leave
good
it and we'll add a little more to it.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of it is going to be how you frame it with the organization. So definitely more discussion on it.
But it's
all right.
probably something we need to discuss as a committee too in the future. So.
Yep. Okay, so I saved the most exciting thing for last, the fees. I'm going to walk you guys through so updated fees. So the first one we're going to look at is the fee in lieu of land dedication. So when new subdivisions happen, developers either need to dedicate land or they can pay this fee in lieu of land dedication. And I'm just going to walk you through line by line how this calculation came to be. So first we look at the projected population increase from 2020 to 2030. So we're expecting an additional 2,631. This number I got from your city planners as they're updating the comprehensive plan right now. So that's where the projected population increase comes from, that all this is built off of. So based on that, we projected a dwelling unit increase during the same time, and this is based on a current average household size in Middleton of 2.21. So we're estimating about an additional 1,200 dwelling units. To maintain our level of service, which is 15 acres of parkland per 1,000 residents, by 2030, you need to acquire an additional 39 acres of parkland. So what the land dedication requirement would be, so this is acres per household. So I took that 39 acres that we need by 2030 and divided it by the number of households, which is about 1,200. So this gives us a land dedication requirement of 0.033 acres. Now this next line, line E, is land cost per acre estimate. So I looked at undeveloped land in the Middleton area and got a per acre cost of about 116,000. Now Matt is going to get some, or has gotten some numbers from Dane County Parks to kind of test this number to see if it's valid. They just did some parkland acquisition in the area. So we're just going to kind of confirm that and see if we need to change it. I don't know. Have you heard anything yet?
I haven't, but they've offered to send it. They just haven't compiled the information yet. But I think everyone's aware they purchased the Acre farm just north of Middleton and the Hellenbrand farm just west of Middleton. So we should have two to kind of look at this number, because I think this number is the most likely to be pointed at, and from a skeptic standpoint of what the cost per acre is. What's interesting is I told Abby Attoon, our director of planning, that number, and she said, "Oh, that's way too low."
But
So,
if you look at my property taxes, I'm paying more than that for a quarter of an acre.
well, I mean, the difference is when we acquire parkland, it's usually undeveloped land that doesn't have city services or amenities to it. So I think that's the one difference in looking at assessed value.
I was going to say 100 to 125 per acres for raw land is right in there.
Okay, so yeah, hopefully we can get back up that number just to have something to stand on, because when I get to the bottom, you'll see it's quite an increase from where we're at now for the fee in lieu. Okay, so that's where that number came from. So line F, to get a total value of the cost to acquire the 39 acres, I multiplied that 115 times 39 and we get about 4.6 million. Then on top of that, we add legal, engineering, design costs of 10%. So that's another about 500,000. So this leaves us with a total acquisition cost of land for 5 million. And then if we divide that by the projected dwelling unit increase, that comes out to $4,220 per dwelling unit. Right now, the city's fee in lieu of land dedication is $2,901. So it is quite a bit higher than that. But I think that number was a bit low. Just to kind of put this into perspective, so the city of Fitchburg's fee in lieu a couple years ago was about 4,000. So this is a little high for the region. 4,000 is a little high, but it's not crazy, I don't think. So reactions.
Well, this also doesn't account for any costs involved to the city in developing the land, staffing the land, caring for the land. This is just purely the cost of land acquisition. Is that?
Approximately.
Okay.
Well, my experience is with the town, and we included the improvements in ours. The first time we did one, it was over 10 grand per dwelling. We're under a whole bunch of different situation than the city. One thing, much larger lots. But that was quite a while ago. The 4,000 per dwelling unit, and as John just said, that's not including any improvements. We don't have any, play equipment or anything else in there, and that gets to be quite expensive.
Yeah, so that's a separate fee, the park development fee. I'll go over that calculation next.
No, I get that, but think in the ballpark.
So Becky, when you calculated this, what was your gut reaction to the final number?
My reaction was, wow, that's a lot higher than what it is now. I don't know if this is going to fly with elected officials, but I don't think it's crazy. I really don't.
Well, I guess I don't either. And listening to David, I feel like at this point, whether they accept it or not, that's their issue. But we shouldn't lowball this just because we don't think they'll like it, if we like it.
Right. And
numbers.
And talking to Matt, his stance, Matt, you can jump in if you want, but just we need to show people exactly what it costs.
Not talks too much anyways.
But I mean, I think I've used the example before with the committee, and I know maybe not everyone was on the commission at that time, but Taylor Park, we had 11 acres donated to us. The park fees for the first 4 phases of development, that really is what Taylor Park served, we collected $38,000 and we spent $1.5 million developing it. So you don't have to spend a lot of time convincing me that if we want our park fees to, and you're not even into that discussion yet, Becky. I mean, the reality is, if we had to go buy 33 acres of land in Middleton tomorrow, what would we pay for that?
Yeah.
And we're not going to find a 33-acre site, but if we had to, a bunch of smaller parcels, I mean, I don't think it's, the question is going to be, can the city continue to buy parkland? that's what the anyone opposed to this would have to say, because otherwise I don't know what I'm sure there's another viewpoint on why you wouldn't do this, but if we have to acquire that land, and I think everyone's agreeing that the cost per acre is probably accurate or low. If we're going to be looking at a situation to acquire parkland, first off, I don't know where it happens. I don't know where we find land to go and acquire. And I can say now, if I found a 33-acre parcel tomorrow in Middleton, in the city of Middleton, that was undeveloped and available, I don't know that I could get it for $5 million. So,
Well, yeah, unless it's undeveloped because it's a swamp or something.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's part of what you run into when you start getting the land dedication, is that you get the
junk stuff.
favorable land, right? You get the swamp area.
So then you get into this reality of what's happening is a 1-story or a couple of 1-stories are getting tore down and a large 4-story is getting developed. And what is that doing to our park system? It's putting more pressure on it. We've got more demand for service. We know we're not getting more dollars from the general fund to, do the project we just completed at Lakeview. That was funded from park development fees. And so if we're going to continue to, invest in the park system, the reality is it's going to come from these fees.
And it doesn't sound like you have developers right now who are saying, oh no, these fees are too high. So there probably is room to increase. Because I think that's where you run into problems, is when developers are like, hey, this is deterring us from developing here. You might want to look at that.
So I haven't heard it directly from a developer. They often ask to have their park fees waived.
Mm-hmm.
And we respond with reasons why we don't think it's appropriate for their park fees to be waived. And then I never hear another thing about it until they've cut a check for their park fees. So.
Becky, you started talking about a few other cities. Would there be some value to adding data here that would show the average amount and things like some Dane County places?
Yeah, so I have a table.
Yeah, sorry, you probably did everywhere, but
It's okay, but there's a lot. Yeah, so comparing the fees between Sun Prairie, Fitchburg, Verona, and Monona on page 118.
Okay.
So I mean, the 4,000 is a little high. I think Fitchburg is the only one that is higher. But it is what it is. This is the cost to develop parkland.
I think I agree with both you and Matt that this is the cost, and this is what should go in the file, in the report, and they can choose to ignore, change it, whatever they want. But it's, I think, for us to be fair with this report, I personally think you should just leave it there as it is, and see what the rest of the committee, whether you agree or disagree.
I agree with that. I think it's a reasonable amount.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Back to my story of the town. Again, ours was pretty comparable, although that included park development, but it then got dropped down to about half of what it had been, primarily because one of the supervisors, who was also a developer, pushed for it.
Yeah.
No data, just wanted to have it lowered.
Yeah.
And I think that probably some of these other communities are having pressure from developers to drop it. And so then those monies have to come from taxpayers, and that seems to be unfair.
I think the pressure from developers is going to be universal. I'm not, I don't feel pressure from feeling pressured that they're going to pressure us. We're ultimately not making the decision, but I think I like the recommendation that you have in there, those numbers. I like what you calculated. And
Okay.
I'm not hearing disagreement, so I think you can.
We'll keep it. And then I did remove, so right now there's a reduced rate for multifamily with 1 bedroom or less. So I removed that, making that a recommendation to not have that be a thing. However, when I talk about park development fees, we are going to talk about potentially having that number reduced for workforce housing because the city, that's a high priority for the city right now. But right now, my recommendation would be to not do that for the fee in lieu of, not waive it for anyone.
All right, I think you have a consensus close to it.
Okay.
Is there
All
more?
right. There is the park improvement fees.
Okay.
So now I'm going to walk you guys through this one. Okay. So our first 17 rows on the left side, these are costs we put together for costs to improve a typical neighborhood park, and you can see kind of the different elements. We put in a neighborhood park. On the right side, these are costs to develop a typical community park. So we have a total park improvement cost of $695,000 for your average neighborhood park, about $1.8 million for your average community park. This next section is to come up with an average improvement cost per acre. So we took a typical park size for neighborhood park, which looking at the neighborhood parks you guys have right now is 3 acres is average and 25 acres is average for a community park. So we break that total improvement cost down per acre. We get $232,000 per acre for a neighborhood park and about $72,000 per acre for a community park. Then the next line 21, we added in utility improvement costs per acre. So we got a number of about $350 per linear foot from city engineers. So we added another $42,000 for neighborhood improvements to park and about $15,000 for those improvements near a community park. So we add that in, we get an average improvement cost per acre of $274,000 for a neighborhood park and about $87,000 for a community park. The next line, line 24, I looked at the balance between the percentage of neighborhood park versus community park. So it's about 21% of your acres are community park, 79% are community park. So I use those weighted numbers to calculate an average improvement cost per acre of the 2 park types. And looking at that, we get a number of about $126,000. So this last section down here breaks that down per dwelling unit. So again, we use that projected population increase of about 2,600, projected additional dwelling units of about 1,200, the additional acres of parkland we need, which is 39 acres. And then just listing that average improvement that I calculated above the 126,000. So if we multiply that by the total 39 acres we need, that's about 4.9 million in park improvements for that 39 acres. If we break that down per dwelling unit, it's 4,123. Somewhere on here, here we go. So right now your park improvement fee is 1,244 for anything other than a multifamily 1-bedroom or efficiency, and that for a 1-bedroom or efficiency is 746 per dwelling unit. So this number is quite higher. So like I said, this number, we have it in the plan right now with a recommendation that council consider on a case-by-case basis, either reducing or eliminating this fee for what they consider workforce housing. So kind of leave it up to them, but that supports their workforce housing initiative. So that is that. Reactions to this number.
If I could say a couple things quick. The first being, so what Becky just took us through is the process of establishing these fees or revising these fees as defined in the state law. And so, you know, in looking at the numbers, it's not hard to argue with the reality. And the other thing I'll leave you with is this. So what she's just shown you in the next 10 years, for us to add 39 acres and develop those 39 acres. It says nothing to the effect of how we're currently using our park development fees to fund improvements in the existing park system.
which means, I'm sorry, I'm not quite following your logic.
So in theory, your park development fee that was calculated whenever it was calculated for the growth of the park system for the next 10 years.
Mhm.
So the money we spend when we, do Lakeview Park, that a much needed project that's going to have great impact on the community, but it didn't improve new park acreage, which was kind of the, and again, we're in a situation where we're not getting new parkland because developers are choosing to pay the fee in lieu. Okay. And then we're also not really able to go out and buy because we don't get a lot of money in the, or I'm sorry, because there isn't a lot of available land. We aren't able to go out and buy, additional acreage because of just the scarcity of land and the land value that it is. So I think the question moving forward, I think, is what is the policy for these fees, and what is the commission comfortable with, and then ultimately what is council going to be comfortable with in terms of fees. But it's hard to argue or point a finger, and I've tried to go back and look at Becky's work and say, well, this is wrong or this is wrong, but in reality the numbers she's showing, we've done a majority of these projects over the last few years, and the numbers are spot on to what we spent in developing those amenities. So and I think someone here said it before, if it isn't paid for by these fees, the taxpayers are paying for it.
So I have a question on the current, the calculation includes the current percentage of total acres per 1,000 residents. Have we looked at all about what a standard ought to be for number of dwellings per neighborhood park or per community park, and seeing how that compares to what we're doing now? In other words, are we shy of something that we should be looking to do more of? Are we artificially charging too much or too little based on our current percentages?
If I remember correctly, I think a lot of that documentation is in earlier sections of this plan. And if I'm going off the top of my head, Becky may know it better, but I think we're kind of in the middle of, I think it's 15 acres per 1,000. That's kind of in the median middle of the range. I think you can go as low as 7 acres per 1,000. But it's about, I think what Becky's looked at is maintaining what we currently.
Right. So we can't, state statutes don't allow us to increase our service. So we can't go higher than 15 acres. Looking at communities of similar size using NRPA's metrics, 15 acres, which is your current standard, is on the high end.
I guess my question more is the balance between the community park and the neighborhood park. Is the 20/80 that we've got here the correct balance, or should we be leaning more towards neighborhood or more towards community? And I'm just kind of guessing that maybe a little bit more towards the neighborhood, but I don't know.
Right. So NRPA used to have kind of recommendations breakdown by park type, but they don't do that anymore. They don't offer that just because every community is so different, and they felt that it doesn't really stand up because every community values parkland differently. So the breakup is a little different. So it's really dependent on, I guess, what you guys are interested in providing and what makes sense to you. I don't think this is atypical to see a breakdown like this, but it's really what you guys are, I guess, most interested in.
I think a lot of our communities our size have one significantly large community park that is probably closer to 50% of their total park acreage, which is we're unique. We have, I would call our community parks smaller in acreage than most communities. And I think it's why you see that 80-20 split. But I think the reality is of getting another community park is, going to be with land development. The most realistic is in Bishop's Bay, where there's the planned 50-acre park. Outside of that, I think we're looking at neighborhood and hoping that we get 3 acres, because that's the minimum for a neighborhood park. I think most of the time we're probably presented with something smaller than 3 acres.
Yeah, I guess, I don't have a big feeling one way or the other. I'd have to look at park usage and, what kind of people use the bigger or the small parks and things like that. I know in my many 30 years in Middleton, when we had kids and everything else, we always went to the little neighborhood parks because they were quick and easy, and we had kids and we weren't involved in organized sports. And it was, to this day, it's really lovely popping up on one of these things every couple blocks when you go out for a walk. So personally, I like the little neighborhood parks. But
Exactly.
But in terms of your dollar figures and what you're looking for, I think this is just like the last thing. These are the numbers that seem to fit the reality of what's there. That we're not developing a policy with these numbers. We're saying this is what it costs. Let's throw those numbers out there and let somebody accept them, reject them, do whatever they want. But at least it's been put out there.
Okay. Others are in agreement with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right, then that is all I had. Is there any questions, anything else anyone want to go through?
I had a question. Maybe I was not around for this. I don't remember. It might have been discussed, but on page 126, what my notes say. My audio really bad.
What was that?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're getting an echo. Something.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. I'm getting an echo myself. Where did it?
Not popping.
No,
Well, David, if you come across it,
there's land next to the Penny Klein Park that is being proposed to the low priority, but to purchase the land near Penny Klein Park.
That in the table of recommendations?
Oh, I remember it was about buying an additional land to the west of the park. Isn't it?
Yeah, for 133,000 plus acquisition costs.
Yes.
I mean, acquisition is going to be 70 to 90,000. That's a lot of money for a half acre. Back to our prior discussion about raw land at 100 to 125. This is working out to be 400,000 per acre. And I question the sensibility of that.
Thoughts from others?
Well, I remember seeing that about that, and I said, why? Again, it was, if I remember, it was acquiring more land to add even more soccer fields or something in there. But
yeah, yep, 2 to 3 soccer fields.
Saying is we don't necessarily need more soccer fields.
And that land is perpetually wet.
Yeah.
And it's not adjacent to the park. It's across the driveway, which isn't a huge issue, but.
Yeah.
Do people want to leave that in there or remove it?
Where did the 133 come from?
So that was our estimates for developing the additional soccer fields.
To make it drain properly, or I don't understand how much, why it would cost 133.
And those fields, that's land currently owned by the lacrosse club, and they've been used as lacrosse fields. So that, there's always, I'm sure, MSA pumped this into a model and gets a development of a soccer field number that kind of populates, and that's what they put in here. But knowing this situation, if we were to acquire those, I don't know that there'd be that level or need for improvement.
Well, you almost need, depends on how much land of that you want to actually use. But if you want to use the majority of it, you probably have to bring in some soil and or drain tile the whole thing. And if you drain tile, then you have to have some way of having that water exit, which I don't know. It would be an engineering question.
So it might be a little bit more than what we have estimated. So right now, this is for grading and seeding.
Okay.
Just taking a look at our landscape architect's notes. So if we do have drainage issues, that would be additional.
This is a half-acre problem child.
So
I'm
hearing a removal.
I'm not eligible to removing. It's already set at a low priority. So
Right.
leaving it in there as a bookend.
I
Say
just,
that issue changes, it's there, but we're not going to come up with that kind of money right now to do that. So
I just want to make sure everybody understands what is involved with that parcel. I'm not suggesting necessarily be removed.
okay. Yeah, I saw it, but I wasn't tracking the numbers. I saw it was a low priority, and I said, good, that's what. I guess personally, I would advocate just leaving it where it is as a low priority, and knowing that at the time it actually comes, it's not like we're running out to spend that money. Others?
I agree.
I agree.
All right, so I think you have your
Okay,
sense.
good.
Any other questions about the report? All right, well, chapter 5 was certainly a lot of work, I'll tell you that. So is chapter 6. It's looking all very good. We've been through other parts of this, so I think that we'll probably be ready to do this in 2 weeks.
All right, so we'll plan on
Something else
16th.
comes up, yeah.
Okay, I'll just put together probably a PowerPoint overview of the highlights. We've done kind of a deep dive of, like you said, the really heavy stuff, chapters 4, 5, and 6. So
I mean, it's a lot. I don't, when I got on this committee 4 or 5 years ago, I had no clue we had actually all that many parts. And you start to think about it, I say, poor Matt, man, he's just he's with us, So it's glad we have him, but
He does a good job.
Yeah.
it's a lot of parks and trails.
All right. Well, I guess you have
The one
I think.
The one thing I'd be remiss not mentioning is I'd really like to see Becky do what she can to illustrate that park fee calculation in the document. I think it's going to be important as we move forward if the commission wants to really stick to those fees, that we have something that easily explains how that fee was derived.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion.
Yep. I have the park development fee calculation in there right now, but I'll add a little spreadsheet table for the fee in lieu of calculation too.
Have you talked to the assessor about raw land costs?
We haven't.
That might be an easy way of getting another number.
Yep. I also want to just pitch the numbers over to Abby and see if we can get some comment from the Workforce Housing Committee, just their initial reaction to the numbers. So I can let you guys know that too, feedback I get from her.
All right, any other comments? All right, then I would entertain a motion. If there's no new business, further business, that we adjourn.
So moved.
Motion second.
A second.
All in favor?
Bye.
Aye. Okay. Thank you all. We'll see you in a
Alright.
couple weeks.
Thanks,
All right.
everyone.
Thank
Night,
you.
everyone.
Right.